Gosh, hi everyone, Yippity Yip Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Depeche Mode record, Memento Mori. Legendary synth-pop and new wave outfit Depeche Mode, they're back, 15th full-length LP. It has been quite a while, 6 years since we heard a record from these guys, which, honestly, given context, is understandable. Their last record, Spirit, had quite a few duds on it, some mixed reviews as well, arguably their weakest project to date. Then you also have the recent passing of founding member Andy Fletcher, so of course there were a lot of questions as to how Depeche Mode would continue without him, even if he wasn't necessarily known for his formal songwriting credits in the band. Now, I will say off the bat, there is a pretty noticeable aesthetic change here on Memento Mori. The instrumentals and the sound of this LP generally, nowhere near as bombastic or as over the top as Depeche Mode's past two records. But this new LP here feels like the band is just kind of stripping things down, going simpler, going starker, bringing in more space and atmosphere. Maybe you could even say they're going back to basics to an extent on this LP, especially given instrumentals on this thing like People Are Good, which kind of sounds like some Radioactivity era Kraftwerk. Meanwhile, other cuts on here feel like they're trying to recapture the rigid simplicity of the band's 80s output, which is kind of odd because even when it's been to the dismay of listeners, Depeche Mode has historically been a band that has continued to look forward. I'm slightly surprised to hear them put out a record that comes off this nostalgic and also somehow misses the mark production-wise on some key moments, as there are some cuts on this thing that feel either like a slight bore or a slight annoyance to listen to. Take the opening track, for example, which has a brooding pace to it. Eerie, beckoning vocals from frontman Dave Gahan, of course, too. Some vaguely industrial perks and hits of noise here and there as well. Look, there are some elements of the track that I like, but the churchy and kind of frightened group vocals that are transitioned into on the chorus, I think are a severe misstep. No more, no more, no more. They just come off tacked on, which I would also say is the case for the chorus on Caroline's Monkey. The chord changes and winding melodies on this point of the song feel like a very odd contrast from the rigid grooves and very grim storytelling on the verses. And while there are other cuts on the record like Wagging Tongue that have a bit more cohesion at their core, I think the instrumental on this one could have used a bit more tempo. Outside of that, it has all the makings of a Depeche Mode classic. The synths on the bridge of this track aren't mixed all that well either, as they kind of come in, tower over everything else, and are deafeningly loud. Which is a shame because the tune at the core of this track is solid and Dave gives a great vocal performance. The sound of the guitars leave a lot to be desired too on the track Ghosts Again. Like, if they were going to sound this thin and brittle and just burnt to a crisp, why even have them on the song? It's like a light, tinny buzz that brings nothing to the track overall, and it's not like the synth patches and perks outside of that are all that exciting either. For sure, they come across old school, but still pretty uninspired. The first real contender on the LP for me musically is Don't Say You Love Me, which is a dramatic, string-kissed ballad with a lot of open space to it. Dave's stellar performance on this track just eats it all up. It's amazing how after all these years, he still sings with so much presence and conviction. There are some killer lyrics on the cut too, especially toward the end. You'll be the killer, I'll be the corpse, you'll be the laughter, I'll be the punchline, of course. There are more highlights to come deeper in the record too, like Soul With Me, which is another spotlit ballad. This one sounds like the saddest last dance ever on prom night, which is set in the midst of a Twin Peaks episode. There's also Before We Drown. The meditative grooves and dense synth layers on this track make it one of the most enveloping on the record. The tempo's got a bit more libido to it as well, which I love. There's also People Are Good that I mentioned earlier. I love that old school production on the track, and the song is quality as well. People are good. Dave is snapping on that one, and Always You is one of the few moments on this thing of nostalgia that I would say could actually hold a candle to some of the band's output during like that Violator or Music for the Masses era. But this time around, there's a bit more punch to the beats. The industrial aesthetics are turned up a bit. It's moody in that slightly oppressive way, but it's still got a pop appeal. And lo and behold, the wailing guitars on Never Let Me Go sound way better than the guitars on the rest of the record. Why the album's sound quality has suddenly like upped a bit on the tail end of the project, I don't know, but it kind of has. Once again, we have a performance from Dave that really sells the track too. And the closing cut, Speak to Me, is a great send-off for the record. The chilling chord progressions, which are underscored by these mesmerizing drones. You have Dave's commanding but mournful vocals on top of that. It's a killer combo. The build on the last leg of the song is stellar, and this has to be, by at least a few miles, the most emotionally potent moment on the record. Now, look, I'll say this. The first half of this LP, I think, is notably weaker than the second half, and I think a lot of that comes down to much of the production, instrumentation, mixing feels a little too rough around the edges. Again, it's like they were trying to capture a vibe from a bygone era in their catalog, and on a few tracks here and there, they just were not that successful. But again, they more or less pulled through toward the finish line with some smash songs as well. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this new LP. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head, it's another video you can check out. Hit that up for the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Depeche Mode, forever.